Psachim Perik Tes Mishnah Hey. We're continuing with Perik Tes. Ma ben Pesach Matram with Pesach Deiros. We mentioned in the Mishnah Gimel there's differences, it's chilukim between Pesach Rishon and the Korban Pesach Sheni. The Mishnah turns to listing the chilukim between the Korban Pesach that was brought in Mitzrayim at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim and the Korban Pesach that was brought in all the coming generations, meaning as the Torah portrays how you do the mitzvah. It's very interesting because a lot of times, shouldn't say a lot of times, but a bunch of mitzvahs, Lamazog Bris Milah, Lamazog Gid Hanoshe, even Korban Pesach, were all mitzvahs that were done before Matan Torah. And, when Matan Torah came, maybe things changed. But over here, the Mishnah is teaching us what the difference is. Ma ben Pesach Mitzrayim the Pesach Deiros. How did the Korban Pesach that was brought in Mitzrayim different from the Korban Pesach that was brought in the succeeding generations? Pesach Mitzrayim Mechaybe Ba'asar. The animal used for the Korban Pesach that's brought in Mitzrayim was taken and set aside for a korban on the 10th of Nisan, which was 4 days before its Shechita. And it's interesting because there are many other Kabbanas that you also need to have a B'dika 4 days beforehand, but it sounds like by Korban Pesach you don't need that. Whereas the animals used for Korban Pesach in later generations may be chosen just before they are shechted. V'ton hazob agudas ezoif. The Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim required that the sprinkling of its blood be done with a bundle of ezoif grass, alamashkef al shtei mezuzos, on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts of every Jewish home, to distinguish them from the Batei Mitzrayim, the homes of the Egyptians, where the firstborn would be killed, whereas all the following Korban Pesachs require no such sprinkling. As the Torah says, this is clear that this halacha applies only to the Korban Pesach of Mitzrayim and not to all following Korban Pesachs. The Korban Pesach of Mitzrayim was eaten in a hurried fashion, which is not required by all generations. Musnechem Chagurim, ready to go. So, Makelchem Yedchem, Masha'enkin by regular Korban Pesach, it's not necessary. Hagam, everyone speaks out that, and we heard this a lot from Rabbeinu essentially, that no matter how much time you give yourself, you always end up rushing to make that Korban by Chatzos. It's definitely related to this inyan of Chipazah. The Gemara learns from the Psukim that it's talking specifically about the Korban Pesach Mitzrayim, not other ones. But Laila Echad. Final difference is that for the Korban Pesach Mitzrayim, like all following Korban Pesachs, we eat only one night. However, the Isser Tichametz during Pesach applied in Mitzrayim for only 1 day. Pesach Deiros Noi Kol Shiva, while the Korban Pesach of the future generations, the Isser B'nei Chametz is kept for 7 days. Mishnah Vav. Amr Bishua says, Shomati Shetmur's Pesach Kreva. Once an animal was hukdash as a korban, the Torah asks substituting another animal for it. If one does try to substitute another animal for it, the Torah decrees that both the original korban and the substitute korban are kadosh. The substitute, the tmura, gets the same kedusha as the original, while the original keeps the kedusha it has originally. For example, if someone has an animal that he was makdash as an oila, it's forbidden to declare about the second animal that was not kadosh. This animal should be a substitute for that oila. If he nevertheless did so, both animals are not karbanos oila, meaning he never took off the kedusha from the first animal and put it on the second animal. This act of tmura, as well as the animal itself, is called tmura. The Mishnah discusses halacha tmura performed on a korban pesach. So Amr Bishua says, Shomati shetmur's pesach kreva. I heard from my rebbeim that the tmura, the substitute of a korban pesach, under certain circumstances, is offered on the mizbeach as a korban shlam. Whenever an animal designated as a korban pesach is not, for whatever reason, actually offered as a korban pesach, it's brought as a korban shlam, and meiser pesach karib shlam. The same halacha would apply to money, which he was makdish with the kedusha of korban pesach. The Gemara learns this from a pasuk. Since the tumor of a pesach has the kedusha of a korban pesach cannot be brought as a korban pesach, either the korban itself or the money from its sale is used to buy a korban shlamim. The tumur is ha-pesach eina kreva. But he also heard from his rebbeim that the tumur of a korban pesach, under other circumstances, is not itself offered as a korban shlamim. Rather, it's left until it can be sold, and the money is then used to buy a shlamim. The Mishnah will explain how this is exactly. But I cannot explain the teaching because he forgot under which circumstances each halacha applies. Amr B'Kiva says to Rabbi Shua, Ani Afarish, I will explain. Your rebbeim referred to the following case. An animal was designated the korban pesach that was lost before Erev Pesach, at which point the second animal was designated as a replacement. This replacement is not a Tamura, and it did not receive its Kedusha from being substituted. Rather, it was designated independently as a Korban Pesach to replace the one that was lost. The original animal was later found. The halacha then depends upon when it was found. If the original korban was found before the replacement Pesach was shechted, the original Pesach becomes a rejected offering, and it therefore cannot be offered as a korban shlamim. Rather, yira ad sheyistoiv, it's left to grate until it develops a blemish, v'yimalcher, and then it's sold, v'ikach b'dam of shlamim, and the shlamim is brought and offered with its money. V'chein tmura, so the same is true with its tmura. The tmura of this rejected Pesach cannot be offered as a shlamim. This is the case in which Rabbi Shua heard that the tmura of a Pesach is not offered. So what are these halachas? Let's speak out. What does it mean that the korban is rejected? Since the original animal was found before he brought the korban Pesach, he has two animals available for being brought as a korban Pesach. Both of them are acceptable to bring as a korban. When he chose to use the replacement animal, he shechted it instead of the original. The original animal became nidche and cannot be offered later even as a shlamim. This because of the general rule that a korban that has once been rejected can never again become qualified to be a korban, even if the reason for its rejection no longer applies. Once it gets nidche, once it's rejected, it can never come back, so to speak. So that's the halacha. If, however, the original korban Pesach was found after the second korban Pesach was shechted, korban shlamim, the original one gets shechted as a shlamim because it was never nidche. Why not? Since it was still lost and not available to be shechted at the proper time, it cannot be said to have been rejected when the replacement was shechted instead. The same is true with its tmura. If the owner did tmura on this Pesach and found after the second one was shechted, the tmura animal acquires the same kedusha as the original, and that would also have to be brought as a shlamim. Mishnah Zayin, Hamafresh nekeva lepische. The Torah says that an animal used for korban Pesach must be a male animal in its first year. But what happens if someone designated a female animal for its korban Pesach, a zachar ben shtei shanim, or a male animal that's in its second year? Both are no good for the korban Pesach. So what's the halacha? Yira ad sheyistoiv. This is a halacha that comes up many times throughout Seder Kachim and applies to karbonis. That halacha is that it must be left to graze until it develops a mum, via macher, and it's then sold. As we learned in the previous Mishnah, an animal that you were makdish as a korban, even if you can't bring it as a korban, it must first develop a mum before we're paid it, because we're not just paid the karbonis if it doesn't have a mum. When the animal with a mum is sold, the sale serves as a pidyon, and the kedusha of the animal is transferred to the money. As to why it needs a mum, since it's in any case disqualified for korban Pesach, that we'll explain in a minute. The yiplu damav lenadava, and then the money goes to the voluntary communal offerings, meaning it'll go to bring the davos in the Beis Hamikdash. There were 6 collections set up in the Beis Hamikdash for the davos. Money from these collections went to buy communal oilers to be brought on the Mizbeach at the time when there were a few korbanos to be brought, as the Mishnah explains in Shkalim. These korbanos oiler were not a communal obligation, rather extra nedavos, because it was brought from the money that they collected for nedavos. So that's what this money was about. Since the female or overage animal was never acceptable to be used as a korban Pesach, and never had a kedushas HaPesach on it, therefore there's no reason for it to be used as a shlamim either, since Moisar HaPesach is l'shlamim, being that this never went to become a Moisar HaPesach, it will not become a shlamim. However, since it was fit to be used as some kind of korban, it did become kadosh, and its value must therefore be used as a korban, with nothing else for it to be used for. The money goes to the v'yiplu damav l'nedava. This is unlike the case of the previous Mishnah, where the animal was originally roi to become a korban Pesach. It therefore became a shlamim. It was a Moisar HaPesach, became a shlamim, but over here it was no longer usable as a korban Pesach. Hamafresh pischa yumeis. If someone designates an animal for his korban Pesach and then dies, lo yeviyenu b'nei achav l'shem Pesach, since no one else is registered on this korban Pesach besides for the dead man, the korban Pesach is no good. The Pesach that becomes ownerless, even from a moment, immediately becomes puzzle, even if someone later registers on it again. And his son, who's Yerishim, may not bring it for himself as a korban Pesach, el l'shem shlamim. He could only bring it as a korban shlamim. This follows the the halacha that any animal designated for Korban Pesach that was not actually offered as a Korban Pesach was brought instead as a Korban Shlamim. Mishnah Ches. HaPesach shenis Arav bezvachim. For Korban Pesach became mixed up with other types of karbanos, which differ from the Korban Pesach regarding the Zrikas Hadam and the Zman Achila. For example, you had 3 sheep that were designated as karbanos, one as Korban Pesach, one as an Osham, one as an Oila, and they all became mixed up with one another. There are many differences between these karbanos as to how many times the blood has to be put on the Mizbeach and how long, or even if the basar of these karbanos is eaten. So that because of this mix-up, none of these animals can now be brought as a korban. Kulan yiru achi yistavu, all of them must be left to graze until they develop a mum, v'yimachru, and then they are sold. This means that the kedusha is transferred by the owner onto money that the owner has, and the money is then used to buy karbanos to replace the ones that were mixed up. Meaning, he's paid the animal with his own money, and says the Korban Pesach, whichever animal it may be, is now kadosh. We're now going to be paid the kedusha onto this coin, and the asham, whichever one it may be, we're going to be paid onto this coin, and the oil, whichever one may be, is going to become kadosh, is going to become nifta onto the third coin. He then knows which coin carries the kedusha of which carbon, and he uses it to buy that type of carbon. However, the 3 animals are presumably not all worth the same amount of money. So what do you do now? So therefore, the owner must bring this type of carbon for the value of the most expensive of the mixed-up animals. And he must also bring the other type of carbon for the value of the most expensive of them. Since we don't know which type of carbon the most expensive animal was, each replacement carbon must be worth the value of the most expensive of the mixed-up animals. For example, if one of the lambs was worth 1 selah, and the other 2 were each worth less than a selah, he brings a replacement Korban Pesach worth 1 selah, an Asham that's worth a selah, and an Oila that's worth at least a selah. And he loses the extra cost from his pocket, which literally means his house. He loses the extra amount of money he must spend in order to buy 3 replacement animals, each worth the price of the most expensive sheep. When he redeems the animals, he must use a selah for each animal, as I state. If, however, the Korban Pesach got mixed up with the Bechiris, whose dam is the same as the Korban Pesach, a firstborn male animal called a Bechar of cattle, sheep, or goats is kadosh automatically at birth and must be given to a kohen who brings it as a carbon. The dam of the Pesach and the dam of the Bechar are the same, so the mix-up doesn't pose any problems regarding being makriv of the carbon and being zerek the dam. The issue that does present as a problem is the achilas hakarbonis. In this regard, the halacha of Korban Pesach and Bechar are different. A Bechar may be eaten only by Kohanim and their household, while Korban Pesach may be eaten by any Yid who has registered on it. Additionally, the time allowed by the Torah to eat the meat of a Bechar is 2 days and the night in between, while Korban Pesach may be eaten only until Chatzos of Leil Pesach. And the Mishnah will now address this issue. Reb Shimon Omer, in this case, Reb Shimon says, in Chaburas Kohanim, if the group registered on the Korban Pesach is made up only of Kohanim, or permitted to eat who are the only ones who are allowed to eat a Bechar, Yochlu, they need not sell the animals and buy new ones, rather they may eat the Korban Pesach on Leil Pesach, and they bring both animals as Karbanos and Erev Pesach. They eat a piece of each one that night. This way they are sure to have the piece of the Korban Pesach offering and have not done anything wrong by eating from the Bechar as well. However, since one of these Karbanos is a Korban Pesach, which can be eaten only until Chatzos, they can eat from these Karbanos only until then. Anything left over after that time becomes Asr as Noisar, since there's a tzad, a very strong tzad, 50-50 chance that it's going to be Korban Pesach. The Chacham, however, argue, and they disagree because it creates a condition that requires the Bechar to be eaten in less than the time that the Torah allows for it, which increases the chance that some of it will be left over and becomes forbidden as Noisar. Therefore, they hold that it's better to let the mix-up animals yiru ad sheyistavu, as in the first case of the Mishnah. So the Chacham Marchaylik on Reb Shimon, Rabbanon Pligalei, this is what the Rab said. The Chacham argue on Reb Shimon. V'amri yiru kulan ad sheyistavu. You have to let all of them graze until they get a mum. V'yavi mois b'mei yafa behen kedamin b'pesach shenis arba b'zvacham ain't love the Reb Shimon. And you would use that money, the most expensive one of them, to bring these karbanas, like we said in the previous case. And the halacha is not like Reb Shimon, the halacha is like the Rabbanon. Okay, here we get to a little bit of a confusing Mishnah. It'll take some time. The next 2 Mishnayos, 3 Mishnayos, will be also discussing different mix-ups. Mishnah Tes. Chabura she'avad pischa. Korban Pesach was usually eaten in a chabura by all those who were nimna on it. The following Mishnah discusses what to do when a group mistakenly shechts two different animals for themselves. The Mishnah discusses four possible cases. The first case is like this. Chabura shavat Pesach, if a group lost its korban Pesach, and they said to one of the members of the chabura, go out, search for the lost Pesach when you find the shechter for us. He went out, found it, and shechted it for himself and the whole chabura. And meanwhile, fearing that the lost animal will not be found in time, the rest of the chabura bought and shechted another animal for their korban Pesach, so that there are now two korbanos Pesach that are shechted for one chabura. The halacha is as if his animal was shechted first, meaning the original korban Pesach was shechted first, he eats from his korban Pesach, and the rest of the group also eats from his Pesach with him. Since they appointed him as their shliach to shech the original animal, they remain part of the original chabura. And once it's shechted, they can no longer be withdraw from the group and register in another one. Therefore, the entire group has to eat from the original Pesach. The second animal is considered a Pesach without a bailam, so it becomes pasul and becomes asur to eat, and it must be burnt. If their animal was shechted first, then they eat from their Pesach, because the shechit of the second Pesach is considered a withdrawal from the first Pesach. At the time they shechted the second animal, the first one was still alive. Therefore, they were still allowed to pull out from that chabura and register on a new one. And he eats from his korban Pesach because he never backed out from it and he never registered on theirs. What if it is unknown which of the two animals were shechted first? Or if both were shechted at the same time? When the Mishnah mentioned above the possibility that both were shechted at the same time, it means that they seem to be shechted at the same time, but in reality, one must have been shechted before the other, leaving us with a suffix, so we don't really know. He eats from his korban Pesach, since whichever animal was shechted first, he remains nimne on that original Pesach, as he never registered on the second one. They may not eat with him from his korban Pesach because of the possibility that their animal was shechted first, in which case they would be considered to have withdrawn from it, and their korban Pesach is taken out to be burnt. They're forbidden to eat from their Pesach as well, because of the possibility that his korban was shechted first, in which case they were never registered on the second animal. The second Pesach is considered without a bailam, and is no good. The chiddush is over here that although they may not eat from either korban that they're bringing, either animal, because one of them they're not even bringing as a korban on Erev Pesach, they're parted from bringing a Pesach Sheni in Iyar, since in any case one of the korbanos, whichever one was shechted first, was in fact shechted for them. They were mekayim the mitzvah, they were yaitze the mitzvah of bringing a korban Pesach, and do not need to bring a Pesach Sheni. Although one who does not bring a korban Pesach and Erev Pesach is required to bring one on Pesach Sheni, eating from the korban is not a necessary condition to be mekayim the mitzvah of Havas HaPesach. So as long as a person's korban Pesach was shechted and the dam was put on the mizbeach properly, he was yaitze the mitzvah of bringing a korban Pesach and doesn't need to bring another one a month later. It's all clear with that. Omar Lahem. So that's the first case. Omar Lahem, if he says to them, if instead of the group instructing him to find and shech the lost Pesach for them, one of them went on his own to search for the lost Pesach, and he said to them, it sounds like a story of a tape, the lost Pesach, a book or something like that. And he said to the other members of the Chabura, if I am late in returning to you, go out and shech the replacement Pesach for me together with you. Meaning, he says, he just reminds them to keep me in the Chabura even if I'm not there. If he went out and found the lost Pesach and he shechted it, and meanwhile the rest of the Chabura bought and shechted another animal for their Pesach offering, the halacha is as follows: if their animal was shechted first, then they eat from their Pesach, since they have withdrawn from the first korban, and he eats with them. Since he asked them to count them in to their Chaburas HaPesach, he's considered to have withdrawn from the first one and registered on theirs when they shechted. In this case, the animal, the original Pesach, must be burnt, since it's considered a korban without a bailam, as we explained previously. And if his animal was shechted first, then he eats from his Pesach, and they eat from their Pesach, since they've already withdrawn from the first Pesach because they never told him to find it and be makriv. Since they did not ask him to find it and be makriv, but put a new Pesach instead, it's evident that they wish to withdraw from the previous one and use a new one, even though they didn't specify that, but their maisim, the maiseyam mechicham aleim, that they wanted to create another chabura. If it's not known which of them was shechted first, or if both were shechted at the same time, then they eat from the Korban Pesach. For either way, they withdrew from the first Korban Pesach and registered on the second one. But he may not eat from their Korban Pesach because of the possibility that the first animal, his Korban Pesach, was shechted first, in which case he was unable to withdraw, to back out from him, and register on the second animal, and his Pesach is taken out to be burnt, and it's forbidden to eat from it as well. Since he was memana, the rest of the Chabura, as his shliach, as his shluchim, to shech the second Pesach for him, and he withdrew from the first Korban Pesach, if in fact the second one was shechted first, because this indeed may have happened, we're not sure, which one was shechted first, so his Korban Pesach needs to be burnt. Upater milasas Pesach Sheni. However, although he may not eat from either Pesach, he's pater for making a Korban Pesach Sheni, because whichever carbon was in fact shechted first, he was registered on it, and he was yet to the mitzvah of bringing a Korban Pesach, and he doesn't have to bring Pesach Sheni, because as long as he's marked of the Pesach, even if he doesn't eat from it, it's okay. The third case of the Mishnah is Amar lahen v'amru lo. If he said to them, and they said to him, that is, he told them that if he delays, they should shech the second Pesach for him, and they told him that he should find the lost Pesach and shech it for them. Then they all eat from the Korban Pesach that was shechted first, because he is the group shliach, and they are his shluchim to shech the Korban Pesach for each other, so that all of them in effect are registered on the Korban Pesach that was shechted first. And the animal shechted second, whichever it was, is considered without a bailam and must be burnt. If it's not known which one was shechted first, both of them are taken out to be burned, since there's a suffix as to which one is the carbon, or which one is without a bailam, and also to be eaten. Nevertheless, both he and the rest of the group are apart from bringing a Korban Pesach Sheni. They were all yet to the chiyuv to bring a Korban Pesach, because regardless of which animal was shechted first, there was this upmach that they were all registered, they were all nimne on their chaburas. The fourth case, if he didn't say anything to them, they didn't say anything to him, so neither he nor the rest of the group asked the other one to shech the Korban Pesach for them, and he went on his own and found and shechted the lost Pesach while they went on their own and brought another carbon and shechted it. They're not responsible for each other, neither party has any claim on the other, and each eats from its own Pesach regardless of when it was shechted. Since neither party made the other one a shliach to shech the Korban Pesach, they have withdrawn from the first chabura, and he never registered for the second. He therefore has the second Korban. He therefore has his Pesach, which was the first animal, and they have theirs, which was the second one, which was Rupim Kaim, the first one. But there's no overlap of anybody being in, double dipping over here. Everyone's good. Which was very interesting, because you would imagine that Lo Amalahem, would be more problematic. Apparently it looks a lot simpler. A little more confusion for Mishnah Yud. If the Korban Pesach of two chaburas became mixed up with each other, so we don't know which animal belongs to which chabura, as long as it's not known which Pesach belongs to which group, neither group can eat from either of them, because it's also to eat from Korban Pesach the one to register on. The karbanos are mixed up before being shechted, therefore it's still possible to back out from either carbon and be memana yourself on the next carbon, as the Mishnah will go on to say. So, one group takes for themselves one of the animals, and the other group takes one of the animals. Each group randomly chooses one of the mixed-up animals. One member of the first chabura goes over to the second chabura and joins them, and one of the members of the second chabura goes over to the first chabura and joins them. And this is what they gotta say. They gotta make it tonight to work it out between them that nobody's going to be eating a Korban Pesach that doesn't belong to them. If this Pesach that we have just chosen is ours, the one that we had originally designated, so that our registration does not need to be changed, but yours does, then you are withdrawn from your Korban Pesach, and you are registered in ours. They instruct him to withdraw from the original carbon and register on theirs, and he's masking. And this Korban Pesach is yours, the one your original group had designated, and thus is still yours. Then we are withdrawn from our Korban Pesach and register on yours. After each group has made this declaration, they will all register for certain on the Korban Pesach that they have in their possession, because even if they switch the original carbon, they have now withdrawn from them and registered on the carbon that is now in front of them. The reason it's necessary to have one member of each group come over to the other group, rather than simply have each group withdrew completely from his Pesach, wherever it is, and make a new selection from among the two animals, is that it's also to withdraw Korban Pesach and leave it completely without a bailam. Since it's necessary to withdraw from one carbon before registering on another, were the entire group to say that they're withdrawing from the original carbon and registering on this one, they'd be leaving their original carbon without any bailam until the new group took it. By having one member of each group come over to the other group, we avoid this problem. If each group happened to choose its original carbon, then each group remains registered on its own Korban Pesach, except to the one member who moved over to the next one, but it's all being done before the Shechita, and it's all being done al das. No one's doing anything against their will, no one's pushing anything on anyone else. And if each group actually took the other group's carbon, then one member of each group has gone along with it, so that when the rest of his group backs out from it to join the other chabura, he at least remains registered on the original carbon. So there's always going to be a bailam at any point of these carbonas. Similarly, if there were 5 groups of 5 members each, or 10 groups of 10 members each, and each of the carbonas Pesach, the Psachim, became mixed up with one another, then each group takes for themselves one of the animals, and one person goes from each group to the other group. And this is the same declaration that they make, mentioned earlier in the Mishnah. After all 5 or all 10 new groups have made this declaration, they're all registered for certain bevadai on the Korban Pesach that they now have. In the example of 5 groups of 5 members each, they form 5 new chaburas, each made up of one member of every original group. This guarantees that at least one original owner of each Korban Pesach is contained in each group. 4 of each newly formed group then say to the 5th member, if the Korban Pesach we've now chosen is your original one, the 4 of us withdraw from our previous offerings and register on yours. The 5th member to whom they say this then joins with 3 of the other members and forms a new group of 4. For example, members 1, 2, 3, and 5, who now declare the same to the remaining member, which is member 4. So they continue until each member has had this declaration made to him by the other 4 groups. This is repeated in all 5 new groups. This Eitzah works only if all the chaburas contain an equal or greater amount of people than there are karbanos. But if one group has a lesser amount of people than there are karbanos, for example, if there are 5 groups and one group only has 4 members, and then one carbon may be left, then this Eitzah is not going to work, because that one carbon may be left without a bailam for a moment. Mishnah Yud Aleph, Shnaim shenisarvu Psachim, 2 people that their karbanos got mixed up. Zeh Moishech le'echad, Zeh Moishech le'echad, Zeh Mamani me'echad min hashuk, Zeh Mamani echad min hashuk. 2 people whose Pesach offerings became mixed up should do as follows. This one takes for himself one animal, and that one takes for himself the other animal. That is, each person randomly chooses one of the 2 animals. Zeh Mamani me'echad min hashuk. This one then registers one person from the street to join with him on the carbon. Zeh Mamani me'echad min hashuk. And that one registers another person on the street to join with him on his carbon. There are now 2 groups of 2 people each. The original owners then instruct each new partner to stand next to the carbon that he has chosen. This original owner then comes over to that Korban Pesach that the owner chose, and that original owner comes over to this Korban Pesach. Each of the original owners is now standing by the carbon that the other original owner chose, together with the owner's new partner. And this is what they say. This is the Tanai, how to make sure that everything is going to get worked out. If this Korban Pesach that we're standing by is really mine, which means that I and your partner have actually switched karbanos, and this is not your Korban Pesach, then you are withdrawn from your Korban Pesach and you're now registered on this one that is mine. And if this Korban Pesach that we're standing by is yours, which means that I and your partner happen to pick our original Korban Pesach, then I am withdrawing from my original Korban Pesach and I'm registering on this one that is yours. This way each pair is registered for bevadai on the Korban Pesach that they now have. Whether or not Reuven and Shimon actually switched their Pesach doesn't matter anymore, for in either case, the 2 groups, Reuven and Yehuda in one group and Shimon and Levi in the other group, are bevadai registered on the Korban Pesach that they now have ad kan.